Another high-side broadcasting video coming back to you guys live here at Kansas Motor Speedway. As you guys can tell, we are, just look at the title, we're doing another NASCAR Heat 5 setup guide. I do have Billy in the booth. That's a very famous phrase. We got Billy in the booth with us here tonight. What's up, Billy?
What's going on, buddy?
Not a whole lot, just ready to dive into the setup here. Just explain to these folks really what's going on with how the things work. We are going to do parts. We decided we'll do part 1 and part 2. So part 1 we'll do the shocks, springs, and weight, and then we'll do the tire, miscellanea, and gears for you guys for part 2. But with that being said, we'll go ahead and we'll dive into it. With the shock, see, this is a default setup, so all the shocks are at 12. This is not where you would typically run them. Usually you run them a little bit lower. You can run them standard, you know, the same all the way down. That does give you a pretty smooth ride. But for balance, you might want, you know, 5.7, 4.6, 5.6, 7.8 for a bumpier track. So for a track that's bumpy, you'd want to run them a little bit higher to give you a better, smoother ride, because you don't want to be losing control of your car over a big bump or something. So for Atlanta, Vegas, especially Vegas, or Auto Club, you know, you might want to run them a little bit higher. You know, you'll see 7.8s for like Auto Club, and then you'll go to a track like Kansas and see 3.4s, you know, so, because Kansas is a very smooth track. So just look at them. You know, obviously the front is for the front of the car, the rear is for the rear of the car. I tend to think of it as lower the shocks, the faster, but you're not going to have so smooth of a ride. And then the higher the shocks, you'll lose a little bit of speed, but you'll have better stability, which is everybody's top thing, speed and stability. So you just gotta kind of find the happy medium with it. Billy's pretty good with the shocks, so if there's anything I missed there, Billy, do you want to dive in there to the shocks?
Yeah, so we can kind of talk a little bit about let's talk a little bit about the front shocks. You know, the bump, you know, it affects the car going into the corner when you need some heavy braking. The rebound pretty much affects the car exiting the corner, you know, if you're under throttle. You know, if you're somewhere like, say, Martinsville or Richmond, you know, you kind of got a little heavy braking, New Hampshire, stuff like that. You know, I'll kind of play around with these shock settings and stuff because, you know, a lot of times you want that car to turn and rotate just a little bit going in the corner. So a lot of times I'll adjust the bumps and stuff, you know, just to see if I can get the car to rotate a little bit more going in. Usually a lot of times, you know, like if you're spinning a little bit coming off the corner, you know, the rear shocks, you know, it's kind of opposite. You know, your bump affects the car exiting the corner when you're in the gas, and then rebound, you know, obviously it affects the car going into a corner under braking. So just you know, a lot of times, like if you're spinning just a little bit coming off the corner, you know, you can adjust the bumps a little bit down some. That'll kind of help the car set a little bit. But you can play around with it, just like kind of like what Eagle says. You know, obviously lower the better. You know, the faster, higher. You know, the higher it's going to be a little bit smoother ride. So, but just play around with it. I mean, it's for your preference. But it's good fine-tuning adjustments, man. You know, especially like road courses and stuff too. You can adjust the bumps and the rebounds. Will help you a lot too. So just play around with it. Just get the feel of it. Just adjust something and see what it does to see what the reaction is.
Yep. So I think we pretty much covered the shocks. I mean, we cover the bumps and the rebounds, the front, the rear. Obviously, if you adjust what happens in the front of the car, if you do the same thing in the rear, the same thing will happen, but to the rear of the car. So if you're having problems coming out, you know, if the rear end's stepping out on you, you could adjust something else in the setup, which is usually my first target. But then again, you can adjust your bumps in the rear, and then if you're spinning out going in, obviously your front bumps. But you really, if you're spinning out, it's not typically going to be the shocks itself. It's probably going to be something else, because shocks, unless you're running them at like 25, really ain't going to have a whole bunch of a difference if you're running them at 4 or if you're running them at 5, you know. So, but
it's more like a fine-tuning adjustment, you know, just a small tweak here and there will help. It'll help.
It is. Yeah, just you know, if you're having a major problem, try adjusting you know, we'll get into the rest of the setup, but so you'll know what to adjust. But if you're really having to make a big adjustment, the shocks is not the first thing you want to go to. That's just for that tick of handling and that tick of speed you might be missing. But I think we pretty much touched on the shocks pretty well. So I think with that being said, we'll go ahead and move over to the weight settings. There's a whole bunch of different things in here with the left weight, the front weight, wedge, and then obviously the front and rear ride heights. I'm messing stuff up already, but obviously you can see this is default, so you don't want to run, especially the ride heights where they're at. And I don't typically run the front weight and wedge at 50, so we'll dive into that. Not a whole lot to talk about with the left weight, but I figure we touch on it for those guys just getting into setups. For an oval track like Kansas or any other oval track, you want the left weight as high as it can possibly be. Now why is because you're doing nothing but turning left. Unless you're turning right to smack the wall head on, you're doing nothing but turning left. So you want as much weight on the left side of the car as you can possibly get it. So obviously you want to run that as high as it can possibly be, because the more weight on the left side of the car, the more the car is going to want to do is turn left. So you obviously, if you're having a problem with the car, don't touch the left weight. You want to leave it at 54.2 if you're at an oval. If you're at a road course, you want it a little bit more even, so maybe 50%, maybe a little under, a little above, depending on what kind of road course you're at. If they have more left-hand turns or right-hand turns, that's up to you. But for me, road courses, I kind of want it more balanced, so I run it closer to 50%. But for an oval track, you want it as much weight on the left side of the car as possible to really make that thing turn going into the turn for sure. So if you're turning left too much coming off the turn, left weight's not something you want to adjust. So for an oval track, 54.2 is, you know, that it's got speed in it because it's helping you turn. So leave that where it's where it's gonna be, and you don't really want to touch that a whole lot. You can try it, but I've really found nothing in it. But if there's anything I missed there with the left weight, Billy, you want to touch on that?
I think you're good, man.
I think we got the left weight pretty good. Well, the front weight, that's a different story. You don't want it as high as it can be. You definitely don't want it as low as it can be. Obviously, more front weight, the tighter the front. That's why it's got front weight. The tighter the front of the car is going to be. You take some of that out, the more your front nose is going to want to turn. So if you're going into a turn and the car's pushing a little bit, you might want to go down on that front weight or touch something else in the setup, which we'll get into. But front weight is something I do mess with quite frequently. It's not usually my first choice, but it's definitely something I touch on a lot. You'll see most setups will have probably between 51 and 52%, and then you'll find other setups down at 49%. I tend to run mine at 53. Obviously, I have crazy other things going on in the rest of the setup in order to make the car able to run 53, 54. And for a track like Phoenix, you can even run 55. I've seen setups at 55% front weight already, and you're gonna probably wonder, well, how in the world are you getting that car to turn if you have it so high? You adjust the springs, track bars, etc. But to pretty much tell you what the front weight does is the looser the front of the car is going to be, the higher, the tighter the front of the car is going to be. To give you a base, I tend to run mine around 53% because it helps to catch the rear of the car. So if you run the front of your car really tight and the rear of your car really loose, going into a turn or off the turn, if your rear end wants to step out a little bit, the front end helps to catch it, and then you don't do a full 360 and wipe out. So, and there's great speed because the rear end's helping you rotate while the front end's catching it, so it's great. I definitely find that to be helpful. And then as towards the end of the run, that front weight isn't wearing out, it's still going to be there. So as your rear end wants to spin more and more, front weight's going to help catch it, and it definitely helps you with long run speed. But I know Billy, he actually runs his a little bit lower, so you want to touch on how you adjust your front weight and how you usually use it in the setup?
Yeah, I mean, usually I typically run mine around anywhere from 51, 52. I just like that rear end to rotate a little bit more. Now you can run like what Eagle says, high front weight. It will make the front of the car really, really snug. I mean, it will tighten the car up. Especially like if you got a track that's like heavy braking. You can run a lot of front weight, and it will actually tighten the car up some. It will help, but I typically run mine a little bit on the lower side because I like that rear end to rotate a little bit more. So but yeah, Eagles, you pretty much nailed it. I mean, front weight, so that was good.
Alrighty, well, if you want to go ahead and touch a little bit of touch base on the wedge is it's a lot more difficult than what people think. They usually think the lower the wedge, the faster, but you run higher
Yeah,
wedge, it can actually help you a little bit. So if you want to touch on the wedge and the ride heights.
obviously, lower, the lower the wedge, the looser the car, the higher the
Yep.
wedge, the tighter the car.
Yep.
I use it as a fine-tuning adjustment. A lot of times if I run my nose weight really kind of low, where I want that rear end to rotate a little bit more, the wedge will kind of offset that. You can actually increase the wedge a little bit to tighten the rear end up, so you get more bang for your buck. Obviously on like when you take like big tracks like Talladega, Daytona, I've seen Atlanta, Auto Club, stuff like that. I'll typically run my wedge just a little bit lower, just where you got that rotation. You got that kind of a free feel, on the car, but just remember, the biggest thing is it's another one of those fine tuning adjustments. It's just really mainly for your preference and how you got the setup set up.
So yeah, I mean, wedge, it's really not too difficult to explain. But some people, just like I said with the front weight, tend to run higher wedge because it does help you on long runs. And you tend to wonder, well, how can you run high weight and high wedge and not be tight? Well, we'll get into the springs and track bars once we get there. But the ride heights, Billy, you want to go ahead and step into the ride heights?
Yeah, so typically with like the front ride height, obviously if you run the front ride height lower, it's going to shift more weight to the front. It'll kind of improve the front grip some, kind of make your car feel a little bit loose probably. And then obviously if you run it higher, you're gonna shift more weight to the rear, so it'll give you more rear end grip. And it's kind of the same thing with the rear ride height. Higher, if you run it higher, you're gonna shift more weight to the front. It'll improve the front grip. And then obviously if you lower it, it's going to adjust more weight to the rear, so you'll get better rear end grip. Typically here, I don't mess with these too much. Maybe if I'm running somewhere like Auto Club or Vegas or Atlanta, I might would adjust them just a little bit because it's so bumpy. Mostly where you get into a lot of the ride heights is when you go to like road courses and you got the rumble strips and stuff like that. That's where I tend to actually experiment with ride heights. Obviously if you got your car a little bit higher, when you hit rumble strips, it's gonna keep the car a little bit more stable. Typically I've run my ride heights as high as 5 on a road course. Just because I want that stability. I don't want to be hitting the rumble strips and stuff and just bouncing all over the place. It tends to help a lot. So it's another one of those things where you can just play around with. Obviously, if you go more weight if you shift more weight to the rear, you're going to have more grip. If you shift more weight to the front, you're going to have a little bit more grip. But it's just one of those kind of feel settings. I mean, it will help on bumpy tracks and stuff, but mainly it's where you want to experiment when you're on road courses. A lot of guys don't change these a lot. They set them really low because you get more speed. I mean, obviously, if you lift the car up off the ground, you're going to lose a little bit of speed. So typically, everybody runs them at default at 4.0. So especially like bigger tracks, But anything you want to add to that, Eagles, you can add to it.
Yeah, just a quick touch on, ovals, because you really got the road courses down. And like you said with the rumble strips, if you're able to control the car going over the rumble strips, then why not? Run them low. If you got to lift a little bit, lift. Because for tracks like Watkins Glen or Road America with long straightaways, you're really losing speed by raising them. So where you gain all your speed is in the turns. So if you're really nailing the turns down, you don't want to be losing speed down the straightaway, which makes up for all that speed you are gaining. So maybe keep them lower and try to just adjust how you're going into the turn. But then again, if you're forcing yourself to a mistake, you don't want to go over the rumble strip wrong and wipe out. So then you might want to raise them a click or two. You won't lose a whole lot of speed. You know, it's not like you raise them one click and you lose 5/10. You probably won't even lose 8/10. It's really all about driver. So then if you go to a place like an oval where you want the car all the way to the ground, for a smooth track, definitely all the way to the ground. But for a track like especially Vegas or Atlanta or even Auto Club, they're really bumpy. You might want to maybe run 4.125 or maybe a click above that. But you are going to lose a little bit of speed because all three of those are very fast ovals. So you would want to run them pretty much to the ground and then maybe adjust the shocks if your car's bouncing a little bit. But I think we touched on the ride heights and the weight settings as a total pretty good there. We're going to go ahead and close this video out with the springs for part 1, and then we'll touch the tire, miscellaneous, and gears in the next video. But we'll go ahead and move over to the front springs. Obviously you can see default there at 900 and 800. You definitely don't want to keep them down there. You'd be surprised, but I've actually found speed raising them. I don't ever usually, unless I'm at a road course, run them lower than 1100. You know, typically I'll run the left front spring higher than the right front spring because you get really good grip going into the turn. It gives you really good left front bite force, and it'll basically just wrap your car around the bottom of the turn, and that's flying if you're able to do that. And it's very hard to set your car up able to do that, and your rear springs has a big factor in doing that. But if you want your front car, or the front of your car, to really grip going into the turn, just raise your probably left spring to like 1200, and maybe your right front spring 1150, 1180. You can even go all the way down to 1100 if it's not gripping right for a certain like track like maybe New Hampshire. But then again, you got tracks like New Hampshire or Kentucky or even Kansas. You hit a spot on the track and it just wants to throw you around. Well, in order to keep yourself from doing that, or at least help a little bit, you want your front springs to really be even. So run them both at 1200 and it'll help. Or you can even run your right front spring higher than your left front, but then you're probably starting to wear off a little bit of speed. So if you keep them even, you're not really losing a whole lot of speed. You just don't have good front grips, and you have to adjust front weight and track bars, etc. But if you run the right front spring higher than the left, then you are going to start wearing off speed, unless you have your car set up totally crazy to counteract that. You can run that. You know, Darlington, I've seen people do it. But just if you run them even, obviously it gives the car good balance. If you run the left front spring higher than the right, it gives you good bite going into the turn. So I'd consider doing that. But then again, if you run your right front spring higher than your left, the car is going to want to go right a little bit more, which can help you for right turn hands at road courses. But for an oval track, you probably want to keep them either even or help your car turn left by having that left front spring higher than the right. Is there anything I didn't touch on there, Billy? If not, you want to go on to the rear springs?
No, I think you pretty much covered that. So we'll talk about the left rear spring. You know, obviously, left rear spring kind of helps you on the exit of the corner. Typically, I'll run mine fairly high because I want that car to have a good feel coming off the corner. I don't want the car getting real sloppy, you know, just losing speed or getting real loose. So typically, I'll run my left rear spring a little bit higher. Let's see, if you run it lower, you're going to be a little bit looser in the middle and off the corner most of the time. Typically on the right rear spring, I usually run mine, 560, between 560 600. This again, it's just some preference where I like that car to be a little bit, just a little bit free, turn a little bit better. Obviously, if you lower that right rear spring, it's going to tighten you up on the exit. If you run it, 590, 600, obviously you're going to be a little bit freer coming off the exit. I play around with these springs a lot, just depending on, kind of where I'm at. Typically like shorter tracks, I'll run mine a little bit higher because I want that car to be free coming off the corner. Not spin out free, but I just want that car to be able to drive off the corner. Uh, Typically at like bigger tracks, like Auto Club, Michigan, Atlanta, places like that, I'll kind of lower them just a little bit because I don't want to lose a whole lot of speed coming off the corner. Um, so it's another one of those just fine tuning adjustments. It's more for preference. It just really depends on how you have, uh, the sway bar, track bars, front weight, wedge. I mean, there's a lot of contributing factors in there that can determine where you run, where you run your rear spring. So that's another one of those things. Just play around with it. You know, obviously if they're lower, uh, they're going to be a little bit looser. If they're tighter, if they're higher, they're going to get a little bit tighter feel. So just play around with it and see what you can come up with to suit your driving style.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit to the rear springs is you kind of want to keep them close together for balance. If you have them both at like 500 even, you're not going to get great rotation, but it does help. It keeps your car balanced, which will help you on long runs. So I tend to think of it, if I run my rear springs both at 600, the car's going to be real loose. And then if I run them both at 400 or lower, it's going to be really, really tight. So what you'll do is the further apart you make your rear springs, so if you have your right front 100 pounds higher than your left, the car's going to be really, 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 really loose. Or if you reverse it, having your left front spring 100 pounds higher than your right, it's going to be really, really, really tight. So, it's just something
Typically, I shoot for about anywhere between 20 to 30 pounds. 20 to 30 split. I know some
difference,
guys
yeah.
do a lot of like 50 split. Um, Typically, I use between 20 and 30 split. Just gives the car a good little balance.
A good balance and good rotation at the same time. So I think we pretty much touched on everything for the rear springs. I think we pretty much touched it. So
Yeah,
with that being said, this is part 1 of your NASCAR 8.5 setup guide, and part 2 be out very soon. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you have any questions, let them know down in the comment section below, and appreciate all you guys for watching. And I think that's gonna do it.
thanks, guys.